it's Jennifer YAY Hammond. And I'm so excited. Oh my gosh, I have a fantastic guest for you today. James is here. We're going to talk about barns. How would you like to live in a barn? So welcome to the show, James.
Oh, thanks so much, Jennifer. I'm delighted to be here. I'm living in a barn, my third barn, actually.
And I was going to say, and one of the things I'm going to highlight right away is, so what are the lessons that we can learn from someone who's almost 90 years old and you've taken the opportunity, as you just said, this is your third barn. So what can you teach us about living in a barn?
Well, I discovered barns in 1975. We'd moved up from New York City to buy a country house, and we looked at 5 so-so houses that we could afford. I think we had $50,000 to spend back then, and we found a barn full of hay and cow droppings and cow stanchions. And I didn't grow up with barns in Coral Gables, Florida. And I said, gosh, isn't that beautiful, that shape? It's so wonderful. And I thought, why not? I mean, one can probably turn that into a house. And I bought the barn, and sure enough, turned it into a home that everybody we knew loved it. And I put in an outdoor pool and started working on the big room. It had a kind of little tenant's quarters attached to it. I fixed those first. But I was loving it. And it was in Sharon, Connecticut, which is about a 2.5-hour drive from Midtown Manhattan, where I was living and working. I was an advertising madman back then.
Ooh.
So I loved it. And one day I came out and I said, you know something? I made a big decision. It's either too hot or too cold or too buggy or, oh, look, there's a bear in the pool. I said, that doesn't, no more outdoor pools living up north. And so since then, the next house, the next barn, built an indoor pool. And I've always had an indoor pool since 1980. I am that spoiled. I have a full-size big pool downstairs, which I use every morning very cheerfully.
I love that. Such a great story. No more bears in the pool.
No, I mean, it's beautiful. People have these beautiful pools, but I say, in truth, how much use do you get out of them? I mean, with the weather, you're not there in the wintertime. It's ridiculous. So I use it 6 days a week. Sunday morning, I don't use it because I get up early. I go to church early for choir rehearsal and all that stuff. But other than that, every day, I feel if I don't have that 30 minutes of serious exercise, I feel like, oh, I'm going to fall apart. You know, I'm sure it's one of the reasons why at 89 I am as healthy as I am, because I have that every morning to get everything in motion. You know, it works out better that way.
Well, I think that's true. I think so often people stay is sitting or not doing things, and I think it's so important to be in motion and continue to keep your, all of your body moving and making it move, because otherwise.
Absolutely. It's terrific. But you ask about, what is it about barns? Well, there was a time in my life when I wasn't a complete cheerful workaholic that I've always been. When I traveled, I didn't do really big traveling till I was in my 60s and early 70s. Traveled a lot, and everywhere I traveled, I bought art because I thought it was the best memory. It was something every time I would look at the painting, I'd say, wow, I remember that was Myanmar or wherever we were, And having a barn is great. I mean, the living room ceiling is 34 feet high. So I have room for art. One magazine on interiors did a review of the house. They said, it looks like a beautifully furnished art gallery, which I love because that's what it is. I'm very happy to see that. I have room to have a lot of memories around me, which I love.
I think traveling around the world, one of the things I've gotten to travel a bit, and I love bringing art home. But it's funny because I've been sad when the art ends up in storage somewhere because I don't have enough wall space for it. So I think having a barn with those really tall ceilings is an exceptional thing. And we'll show some of these beautiful images that you've sent. Let's also talk
Oh, yeah.
about your barn. One of the living room I'm looking at has a beautiful fireplace. What is it like did you install that fireplace, or did it come?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. This was the barn. The living room was the hayloft. Haylofts did not have brick fireplaces back then. Yeah, and on the other side of that is the other big room of the barn, which I turned into the kitchen and TV relaxing room. And then next to that is a section we added when I built the pool. I added a whole section, which is now the dining room and the pool room, which is downstairs. You know, but
And what did you do with the loft? The loft of the barn, is that the bedroom up there?
oh, you mean that upper higher room? That was my office for a long, long time. And this just about a year ago, I'm very, very spoiled. I will tell you this, Jen, when I was 64, I made one of those really smart decisions. I decided I won't always be on top of the world, even though I still am. And a home is not a home without a woman to really make it function perfectly. And I knew this sweet little Mexican lady who had worked for friends of mine in Mexico. I had a home in Acapulco for 25 years. And I knew she'd crossed the border, and I called her, and she didn't speak a word of English, but I've totally bilingual. And she came to work for me, and she is still with me. So this is 25 years later, and she introduces herself to people in wonderful English, and she's a citizen now, but she'll say, "I am Senor Jim's nanny."
Oh,
and I think, great. Yeah, I don't know what it I got. Oh, at any rate,
well,
it
you've
is very.
also, I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the other real estate you've owned. So you've owned in the Virgin Islands, right?
I did 8 years living on top of a mountain looking out toward the British Virgins, which was very beautiful. I loved St. Thomas. It's so strange to live on an island where you're surrounded by water, and it's an arid island. Our roofs were pitched to collect water. I
Right.
mean, it was just amazing to me. And then it was blown away twice by hurricanes. Now, I grew up with hurricanes in Florida, but twice they had category 4 or 5 hurricanes that sat on top of the island that did not move and just destroyed everything. So I said, hell with it. Let's give earthquakes a chance. So we moved to Acapulco, which is earthquake center. And it didn't matter. I really had, I thought, the most beautiful villa in all of Acapulco, and I loved it. And I lived there for 25 years in
Wow.
Acapulco, which does have the best winter weather in the entire world, unless you're a downhill skier. I mean, it is heaven, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to get away from New York winters, and it was wonderful.
It's so interesting because I actually have lived down in the Virgin Islands as well. I lived in St. Croix,
Oh,
and
it's lovely.
I also lived over in Tortola in the British
Oh,
Islands.
oh,
So
the Virgins they're great, and all of the islands it's terrific. I'm a happy island person. Maybe that's because you and I both have a joint Florida background. When I'm in the tropics, I go, oh, good, I'm home.
exactly. And I love to just be by the water and the beaches and as you
Yeah,
having just the best weather. Why not just live where the best weather is?
that's right. That's right.
So did you
That's
have, when you were down in Acapulco, did you have did you have another barn or an unusual place? What was your home there?
where in Acapulco?
Yeah.
No, we had I found an incredible villa. It was a perfect rectangle that had been built by one of the great Mexican architects back about I don't know, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And he did something incredibly smart in it. It had 12-foot overhangs. So we were in the shade. Because one of the things in life that I have to be careful of, if I have a fragile organ, it is my skin. I grew up under the sun before sunblock. And so I have to be very careful about being in sun. And we had this wonderful, wonderful, exquisite home where we could be in the shade without killing ourselves under the sun all the time, you know. But I love the home, and it was massive and powerful and strong and huge. Did not really need to have a home that had 9 bedrooms and 8.5 bathrooms and a 5-bedroom staff house. and 67 palm trees. It was quite wonderful. I really did love it.
So you've owned real estate in a lot of places. So we were talking about the barn. We started with the barns, and then down in the U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Thomas,
Right,
Acapulco.
right.
But you also didn't you own some property in New York City as well?
In New York, again, it was a smart decision. I had accepted a job in 1971 as creative director of J. Walter Thompson and moved 5,400 miles to Buenos Aires, Argentina, when my daughters were only 9 and 11. It was a wonderful adventure, and we lived there for 4 years. And we came back, and I thought, that there was a big recession in 1974, and I thought the only way to live in New York and have a decreasing cost of living, because I knew it would go back up, way up above the stars and cost of living, was to own a brownstone. And I went out and bought an 8-apartment brownstone with a garden duplex, big enough for my daughters. And I even had a south garden, a 20 by 30-foot south garden with an apple tree, so I could bring in the migrant workers to pick the crops. And I could walk to work. That's what I
Oh,
loved. I loved to walk to work at 7:30 in the morning in New York. I went to work early my whole life. And I loved having a brownstone. And I kept it it swept, and if there was a snowfall, you had 12 hours to get the snow off in front of your house or your steps, or you could be sued by the city.
oh.
And 3 days a week, I'd take the garbage cans out from underneath the steps and put them out on the street to be picked up. It was it was fine, you know. It was there. Then I had beautiful apartments in New York. I moved around New York. I would move always so that I could continue walking to work. I even gave myself 8 years of living in absolute luxury. I bought an apartment in Olympic Tower, which Onassis had built when he was married to Jackie. It was right next to, talk about sexy view. I was at 36th floor looking down into the spires of St. Patrick's Cathedral and out to the city. So
Wow.
it was delicious. I laughed one night. I was there alone reading, and that's what I'm doing most of the time if I'm not writing, is reading. And I laughed. Here I am, the best view of all of Manhattan, and I had all of the blinds closed. And I realized you really don't live with a view, you live with your space. That's very important. I've told people that for years in buying homes. Yes, it's wonderful to not be on a highway where you have traffic noises, but you don't really buy a house because of the views, because you're not going to stand there all day looking out the window. I know I never bought anything unless I sat down in every room and looked at it from the standpoint of, how does this look sitting down in the kitchen, sitting down in the living room? Because that's where you live, you know.
I agree with you. I think the interesting thing is, so often people forget about the flow of a house. You know,
Yeah.
in the news, they've been talking about the houses are shrinking in the United States. And one of the things we're finding is that designers are taking away hallways And another one of the rooms that's traditional is a dining room, because so often people have an eat-in kitchen.
It's
And
an
again,
open.
it's about the flow. Yeah. And taking down the walls, and just how do you flow? Do you flow from the kitchen, then you sit down and you eat, then you have an eat-in little area, then you have like a little area for a work area where you have a laptop computer. And the flow of a house is so much more important than particularly the view, although we all love the view. But I agree with you. It's much more important how you live in the house and how the house flows for you and your
Absolutely.
lifestyle. Yeah.
I remember how I got off the subject earlier. You asked me what did I do with the balcony over the living room. That was my office. And then about a year ago, my nanny, whom I told you about, Esther Lopez Hernandez, Esther, and my elder daughter, who's a scientist, a drug researcher and medical writer, both came to me and said, listen to us, old man, it's over. You're not going to be walking up and down the 15 curved steps. You could fall and you're up there and no. And so I turned one of the master bedrooms of the house into a wonderful office. I have a 600 square foot office, which is total luxury. I know most people have a corner of their room. No, I have a big room with its own bath and a porch off the roof. So,
wow. So, I mean,
I love it.
I was going to say, so it's amazing because you keep creating these amazing spaces. So you also mentioned that in 1978, you fell in love with an abandoned stack of English stone on a 450 acres, and you created a business.
I've created a business. It's called Troutbeck. It's a country inn. I marketed it as a high-end conference center to get to reach really the top of corporate America, and then a country inn on weekends. And then after 5 years, I built a ballroom, which it didn't have, matching the stones, so that it looked like it was part of it. And my friends would call from New York and say, Flaherty, what are you doing up there in anemia or amnesia, whatever you call it? Come back to New York where you belong. And I'd say, what are you doing? Talking to the corner deli owner. I have Henry Kissinger this week. And next week I have the gods of American Express. And I had all the important America was coming to my door. And I still live in that same town, actually across the street from the inn, which, thank you, Jesus, I do not own anymore. I sold it in 2016. No one's ever worked for a living until they worked in hospitality.
Right.
Take my word for it. 70 hours a week for the first 10 years to make it work.
Right.
Yeah.
And you are a madman, marketing man, and you understand, you can create words and you can do marketing, but I'll tell you, when you work in hospitality, it
never ends.
Yeah, it never ends.
Never ends.
It's quite.
I was married 216 times. I did that many weddings.
Wow, that's amazing. And that's one thing that I talk about a lot, is that there's so many different ways that you can use real estate, to have a business or create an income. You talked about owning the brownstone with the multiple apartments. That's one way you can create income. And you just talked about this inn where you had all these weddings. That's another way. I talk a lot of times with people who, have often told me that they're having challenges financially, whether it's a farm or whatnot. And we talked about the barns that you've owned. So often you have looked at things from such an artistic viewpoint when it comes to real estate, which is amazing.
But also in other income things, Jennifer, because I know that's important, especially with the economy and the way the world is going in general, is folks should remember, if they have a really interesting property, be it farm or city or wherever in the hell it is, the thing called Airbnb.
Yeah.
I've got to tell you, I know people that have been able to keep their homes and go on living because they open their home to strangers. And sometimes they're there, or sometimes they're not there at all. And then they have a cleaning service come in to follow it. It's terrific. And I know many people travel in Europe. One of my daughters lives in England, and she travels a lot in Europe, and she always stays in Airbnb. She said she's met some wonderful families, and it all works out very well. I just think it's a terrific thing to do and a terrific way to make use of your property. Another quick thing before I forget, I know we don't have all the time in the world. I found out something recently. I don't know. It may vary state to state. When people have a big home, which is often the truth, and then they sell the house to get the money. Of course, if I sell this house right now, I'm going to pay big capital gains on it. If I go on living in the house, if I'm able to afford it, and with my nanny, who also lives here, she has her own apartment in the house, and go on living here and die eventually, it goes to my children without them paying taxes on it.
There's some
realize
great
that?
state ones, as well as there's other ones. There's 1031 tax-free exchanges. There's all sorts of other, I mean, you should just look into, I always talk to people, when you go into property, you should look at how you're going to exit it, whether it means
absolutely,
or whether it means because you're going to 1031 it, or which is an IRS code 1031, or there's so many different ways, or if you want to use part of it for short-term rentals like Airbnb or vacation rentals.
Right.
I agree. I think there's so many ways that you can leverage a property. Even what you just said about the weddings. So often I've talked to people who just they have an amazing property and they've never thought about sharing it, even just for weddings 3 or 4 times a year, never mind.
Absolutely.
It's an amazing opportunity. So thank you for sharing all your real estate stories with us. What a great thing. So I want people to know about, you said, you talk about if you're not reading, you're writing. So tell us about your books.
Well, I've written 4 books. I wrote 2 of them in my 80s, the 2 nonfiction books, which are about aging cheerfully and productively. And I'm going to probably run some workshops on that in the coming months, based on the title of my newest book, which is called Loving Longevity. I'm 89 and think my next 5 to 10 years might be my best.
Yeah.
And I'm going to run workshops about that. And I'm working on another novel. Hey, I'm busy. It keeps, here's my daily schedule. And I have to keep up with it. I'll tell you, it's a hell of a bore.
It's so important to always keep yourself busy. And as you said, even with your body, keeping your body moving. And I think, I think that old saying, if you don't use it, you lose it, I think is so true, especially as
absolutely.
You got to keep your body trained to keep moving.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
As you come into 90. So I know I love your optimism, your happy attitude. So I'm going to ask you to lift your voice and say yay with me as we go off the air. Is that okay?
With pleasure.
All right. 3, 2, 1. What a pleasure. Thank you for being here with me.
Thank you, Jennifer.
You could just help people understand the principles, then they could make better decisions in real estate. We started getting an audience. And so with the radio show, I actually get to help many, many people.
Hi, I'm Jack Canfield. You may know me as the co-author of the Chippensis for the Soul series. And if you want more help in getting from where you are to where you want to be, I want to encourage you to listen to the Jennifer Hammond Show